Hello, good morning, good afternoon to those joining us in the Gulf region. My name is Raymond Karam, and I'm the Chief Program and Development Officer here at AGSIW. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar looking at the future of higher education in the Gulf. This program is part of a wider initiative at AGSIW looking at how Gulf societies can best emerge from the coronavirus pandemic, and we're very excited to have a stellar lineup with some of the most exciting voices on this topic. First, we have our friend, Dr. Mariet Westermann, who joined NYU Abu Dhabi as Vice Chancellor in August 2019, where she oversees all academic, administrative, and operational affairs. Previously, she worked at the Mellon Foundation since 2010, serving as the Executive Vice President for Programs and Research since 2016. Prior to the Mellon Foundation, she was on the faculty at NYU, first as Director of the Institute of Fine Arts, and then as the first Provost of NYU Abu Dhabi. Before joining NYU in 2002, she was Associate Director of Research at the Clark Art Institute. Her principal interest is the art of the Netherlands, her native country, and she is widely published in that field. Kevin Guthrie is the president of Ithaca, a nonprofit that provides 3 innovative services that benefit the academic community: JSTOR, Portico, and Ithaca SNR. He is an executive and entrepreneur with expertise in high technology and non-for-profit management. He was the founding president of JSTOR and Ithaca and oversaw their merger in 2010. Moderating the session today is our colleague Kristin Diwan, senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Her current projects concern generational change, nationalism, and the evolution of Islamism in the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Her work is widely featured on our website, and I urge you to check agsiw.org and sign up for our weekly newsletter, The Dow, for the latest from Kristin and other scholars and contributors. A disclaimer before we start, the webinar today is being recorded and will be made available on our website as soon as tomorrow. Also, a reminder to our audience, you are in listen-only mode, but you will be able to ask your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom, or you can also email us at info@agsiw.org or tag us on Twitter at Gulf States Inst. With that, Kristin, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Raymond. Thanks for the introduction. And really, thank you to all of you who are joining us here today. Always when I come to this time of the year, you know, late summer and moving into fall, it's a time of great anticipation. I mean, I taught in the universities for a decade and studied even longer than that in universities. And I always still get this feeling at this time of the year of like new beginnings and that feeling of anticipation. And I'm sure a lot of you who are with us today are parents or perhaps even students and are looking forward to this new year, but with that anticipation mixed with a lot of new anxieties, right? And uncertainty as we kind of wrestle with this coronavirus pandemic, which is affecting, you know, all of us globally and having major impacts, obviously, on education and on higher education in particular. So we thought it'd be a really great time just to check in with Mariet Westermann, who's the Vice Chancellor at NYU Abu Dhabi. And we're also thrilled to welcome Kevin Guthrie, who Raymond mentioned as a president of Ithaca, but who has also spent really decades thinking about the role of education within society and thinking in particular about how technology changes that relationship and how it can really improve educational outcomes. So if we think about the position of higher education in the Gulf and NYU Abu Dhabi in particular, it's really interesting that the Gulf in this period has become really, many of the Gulf states, not just the UAE, but also Qatar, and others are looking to do this and have become among the largest hosts of international branch campuses, globally serving students, both at home while attracting a lot of global talent. And this obviously represents an amazing opportunity to draw upon people from around the world and to really benefit from that global network. But it obviously poses distinct challenges for these branch campuses at this particular time. So I wanted to turn to you first, Mariet, Dr. Westermann, and just ask you to introduce us a little bit more, for those who don't know, to NYU Abu Dhabi. Talk a little bit more about its mission and the role that it's playing, particularly within the UAE.
Thank you so much, Kristin, and it's great to be with all of you. Welcome all who are tuning in from the region and around the world. So NYU Abu Dhabi, you can see us here. The campus is here on both sides behind me. You see it looking out there as night falls onto Reem Island and Abu Dhabi city more broadly. So NYU Abu Dhabi is a very interesting university built in the 21st century, one of the few new universities built in the 21st century. We are a youthful institution. We are built around a liberal arts college, undergraduate college in the American tradition, but very much at home, decentered out of that tradition in this dynamic crossroads of the world that is Abu Dhabi and the UAE. And that liberal arts college that we started from our students, and I'll say something about them in a second, is wrapped within the plenitude and the research heft of a major university, a global research university that is New York University, a university that extends around the world and is a very large, the largest private university in America with some 60,000 students. We have 1,600 of those students at the moment. We're still growing. We're 10 years young. We opened our doors to students, in fact, 11 years ago now. And I can say something about why this institution came here, why it is in Abu Dhabi, and what it tries to do. NYU Abu Dhabi really arose from the joint vision of two really extraordinary men. One is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and the other is John Sexton, who was then the president of New York University. And John had begun to think about NYU as a global institution, making more of the many study abroad programs we had. Together, they envisioned a university in an entirely new model, a resolutely international university that would be in and of Abu Dhabi, in and of New York University as a global institution, and in and of the world. These three registers, locational registers, were extremely clear in their minds, and I was very lucky, as you heard, I was the first provost, the first employee, in fact, of the university, and helping to create it and envision it. And the idea would be that we would offer our programs across all disciplines: science, technology, engineering, the humanities, the arts, and the social sciences. But we would do it with a view to really teaching students from around the world, talent wherever it could be found. We recruited students on the following principle. We said, okay, talent is isometrically distributed around the world. Talent is everywhere, but the ability to develop it is very inequitable. And so what you want to do if you're a university geared to human and social development, which all universities really are, when you think about it, societal development, we should try to find the talent wherever it is and help it come here, regardless of the backgrounds that people come from and their resources. And we will choose students who really believe in being together with difference from other countries, from other backgrounds, religions, and so forth, circumstances. And we want to make sure that these students, apart from being smart and accomplished in the places where they've been, that they also have a hope to sort of foster a better, a more interconnected, a more collaborative, a more peaceful world in whatever discipline they want to do that. And I think that we really have a very specific sort of forward-looking cast because of that commitment that not only our students, but also our faculty, who we recruited both from within NYU and far beyond, from around the world, that our professors also would have that commitment to teaching students in that way, collaboratively, with almost a little bit of an idealistic cast to when you come out of college, out of university, that you don't only want to do well, it's fine to do well, but you also want to do good in some way and give back. And our students have been doing that, I have to say, remarkably well. They come from 120 countries or so, and our faculty from about half and staff from about half that many countries. So it is a truly unusual experiment in international and intercultural education today, brought to a place, Abu Dhabi, that in my experience of the country over the last 13 years, is also very determined to be a positive and helpful player in the world and in the region, and sees education as totally critical to that. Education of its own citizens, 20% of our students are from the Emirates, but also by bringing people from around the world to help work to a vision of a more peaceable planet, a more habitable planet, and one with greater international solidarity. So that is us, and it puts us in a special position, I think, to think forward of what we do now that this pandemic is with us.
Thanks. So Mariet's talked about finding talent where it is, going to find talent where it is, and really expanding opportunity geographically. Kevin, I know that you've spent decades really thinking about these close relationship between education and society, and thinking about the role of technology and how it can play a role, and thinking about how it really changes that relationship, and then how it can also work to expand and give greater reach and improve learning outcomes. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about that work and what you've been doing over the decades in this space?
Yes, of course, and thank you for including me in this great event. I think back. I just a very brief background. I've been working in technology and education since 1994, when I was lucky enough to work with Bill Bowen at the Mellon Foundation. Bill Bowen was one of the leading higher education leaders in the United States for really in the 20th century, and was president of Princeton and then president of the Mellon Foundation. And he had the idea, and I worked with him on the creation of JSTOR. So I worked at JSTOR, for those of you who are familiar with the journals database, from 1995 going forward. So it was working with technology, content, and education in that context. And then we started together, again, Bill Bowen, in 2004, Ithaca, which has a group called Ithaca SNR that's been focused on the impact of online learning technologies on education for some time. But as we think about these huge changes and all of this upheaval that we're facing, one of the big questions is, how quickly can higher education adapt? How quickly can higher education move? But the other question is, what are those universal values and principles that higher education bring to the world, and how do we retain those and maintain those over time? And I reached back to a talk that Bill gave, that President Bowen gave at the Romanes lecture at Oxford in 2000. So amazingly, 20 years ago. I remember working on this talk, and it seems like so much less than 20 years ago. But in that talk, Bill highlights the principle, the key principles of higher education. And I just want to highlight them here because there are 5 principles, and I think they are timeless, and I think they're universal across different environments. So, and they're also kind of a framework for thinking about how change is impacting this territory. So the first one is obviously educating students, and it's, as Mariet said, educating them broadly so that they can lead a productive life in the world society and living in, contributing to a civilized society. The second is universities as serving as engines of opportunity and social mobility, giving opportunity to people who may not have had it in the past. The zillions of stories of people who are first generation college students who are now leading universities or leading in our society. We all know that the inequities, inequalities, and economic inequalities are truly horrendous for society. So that social mobility and economic mobility is terribly important. The research mission of universities, their ability to create new knowledge of every kind. And that's not just market value knowledge, right? Not just new products or new capabilities, but fundamental research, basic research, some of which may not have immediate market value, maybe some of which has no market value at all. So that building of new knowledge is a really important part of the mission that has to sustain. Encouraging the thoughtful critic and the dissenting voice. Universities have always been, and we hope can continue to be, places where people with controversial notions, different ideas, can speak about them, can be challenged about them, can engage with students and other faculty about them in ways that's productive over time and constructive in advancing understanding of different points of view and perspectives. And connected to that, the fifth principle being that, just being able to have an environment that can defend the cultural, moral, and intellectual values that can't be priced by the market, that aren't priced by the market, whether those are issues in the humanities or in STEM, that having a place where the pursuit of higher values is part of the core mission and is protected is really fundamental component of our society. And supporting those as a public good in our environment, I think is critical to the continued, as Mariet said, a peaceable world where people have better understanding of one another. And, crossing all those, sort of universal and sustained values are these forces of technological change, of political change, and now global health issues. And, how do you sustain those principles as you face these cross currents is really, I think, the fundamental challenge for global higher education today. And hopefully we'll talk about a few aspects of those challenges here this morning.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to that then, to the current challenges. Mariet, I was able to watch part of your commencement, so I know that you've been adapting in some ways by going online. It was a fully online affair. And it was really quite moving in how you were able to highlight kind of individual achievements. But obviously this pandemic offers really enormous challenges, and probably some very specific ones for someone who's sitting at the head of a global university like you are, that brings your students from as you mentioned, what was it, 120 different countries. So maybe tell us just a little bit about how NYU Abu Dhabi is reacting to that and how you're adapting. Sorry, Mariet, you're on mute.
It's always so embarrassing. After all this time, you'd think you'd know when to unmute, but here I am. So after, needless to say, of course, no one wants to send their students home, as many universities had to when COVID-19 started its march around the world. And we were in a very particular condition in March where it was obvious to us that we had to start teaching online. That was a requirement of the Ministry of Education, and it also made sense from a safety point of view. But we also felt that we had, with our students from 120 countries and professors from almost half that many, we should not, at that moment in March, send our students on unsafe paths around the world where they could expose others or themselves be exposed. So we decided quite early on that we would try to have those students of ours who were not already studying abroad, they went home because their various campuses closed. But we kept the students, we offered to students who wanted to stay with us in the dorms, even when we studied online. And you'd think, well, what was that like? Because you're sitting in your dorm room. But the reality is that although that was hard, I think many of our students appreciated that we made that possible for them and didn't put their families at risk or send them around the world. And more importantly, something happened as we all went teaching online. I teach a course a year. I was myself teaching at the time. And I thought, well, here we go. What do I do now? I have to learn this too. And I learned a lot from my students, I have to say, what they liked, what they didn't like, what was hard. And I certainly felt that I saw them all better because I saw them individually on my screen every week. And what many of our professors and also many of our students and staff reported was that even though we were online, there was something special about knowing that our students were right there. We could see them walking on the campus to get food or take a little air on this beautiful campus behind us. This beautiful campus has wonderful outdoor spaces that are also part of the home, so we could quarantine in them, so to speak. So we knew we were together, and I think our community as as a result, stayed together very well, even though we mostly interacted online. We mastered all these things that people had to do, Zoom town halls, arts events, and so forth. But I think our events were very plentiful and very vigorously attended. And I think we all together sort of came to a view that even though at first everybody, of course, hoped, well, maybe the virus will go away in a few months, that this was obviously not going to happen. I think we collectively came to the view that we couldn't put our lives on hold. And we certainly, as a university, geared to teaching the next generation and putting new important knowledge into the world, knowledge about COVID-19, among other things, that we should not completely shut down, that it was really important not to put our lives on hold, and especially not the lives of our researchers, our teachers, and most especially our students. And I think those touchstones that we then worked with, health and safety first, but within that, always think about academic continuity and how you can best maintain it, your instructional and your research functions, that we just had to find a way forward. And I think those universities that have been able to do that and adapt, and many have in various ways, will in the end come out a little stronger, especially the ones that, as Kevin has reminded us, that are geared to using what they're learning to innovate and do this work of online education and keeping community together despite this great threat. They will probably come out ahead in what will eventually be a post-pandemic moment.
Well, maybe let's turn to you, Kevin, then, because you must feel like you spent your whole lifetime almost for a moment like this, because you have been really focused on technology and thinking about that. What are some of the things that you're seeing as all of us wrestle both in higher education of how to move education online? What are some of the lessons that you've learned through your long research that you're seeing applied right now, or not applied?
Yeah, I think it's hard to apply it. Well, I think there are issues of in all of our lives. I think we're seeing where this pandemic and COVID-19 is revealing things about our society, revealing things about the way we do things, and in ways that are highlighted. I know that's true in the United States for sure. And so one of the things is really understanding some of the fundamentals underneath how things work, and you start to learn how bundled up things are, how administrative functions or processes that we have in our institutions, they have a way of moving, and then something changes. Now, typically, we change those gradually and evolve them. And here, literally, colleges and universities went to exclusively online in weeks, like 2 weeks, 1 week, 3 weeks, whatever. But if you step back from it a little bit, I mean, there are a couple things that it's worth thinking about that predate the pandemic. So one of the big questions is, what does it mean to be a teaching institution or a research institution? And what I would say is that there is a bundle that's worth thinking about, which is partly education, by which I mean students come in, they have a knowledge of something at a certain level, they do a series of things, and now they have a knowledge at another level. They've developed a competency that they didn't have before. So they've actually moved from point A to point Z in their understanding during that time. But universities also play a very important credentialing role, right? So that says, hey, not only did I teach these folks, but I can tell you that they know these things, that I can give them this credential, which says they've accomplished these steps and they're in this position, and which is different from educating, right? I mean, educating is the learning process, and credentialing is the validating part of that process. And then there's a third component, which I think sometimes gets forgotten, but which is incredibly important in society, which is the selection piece. And by that, we mean, this institution has very high quality. I'm going to go there to recruit employees, or I'm going to go there to recruit graduate students. So it has the effect of efficiency for finding great talent. So universities do all these three things, do these things together. And sometimes what happens with what was happening with technology, as we've seen in other industries, is the unbundling of industries, right? So colleges and universities were feeling the pressure of that unbundling. Some places saying that there should be more emphasis on credentialing and that there should be more badges and certificates and that kind of thing to make the process of credentialing independent. Other places focusing on the education, and other places potentially focusing on selection. So you had this pressure to unbundle into the components that pre-existed the pandemic. Then when the pandemic hit, and people all went online, I mean, obviously, if you're teaching in person and then you're asked to teach online in 2 weeks, you're not going to do it. You're not going to be able to change things to do it really well. We've been doing research in the Ithaca S&R part of our organization for more than a decade on the effectiveness of online learning. So we've done randomized controlled trials where we're comparing an online learning and teaching course in statistics versus a face-to-face. And what we've learned in both doing those types of studies and then also doing practical studies where we try to get an online course taught in a set of universities is that the administrative structures and the processes are what prevent institutions from being able to implement these things. They tend to lag. So you might have a professor who's really eager to use an online teaching tool, but they want to go ahead and teach online, but the department won't approve it, or it won't be able to be used in another department for a major, or all those types of things that have been structured around the traditional way of doing things. So what we've seen in the very fast implementation of online in the pandemic is obviously the administrative functions, the processes, the procedures, all those things significantly lag. So, the experience that students had in the spring was not great. It was basically this right here, Zoom for a classroom. There weren't really specialized tools unless there was an institution that had already been heavily online. And so, many students had not a great experience, but at the same time, faculty were universally exposed to these tools and have had experience with, that actually is really valuable. We were able to do this that I couldn't do before. So I do think that this experience has fundamentally changed the perception of online, and not always either to the negative or to the positive. Just like in our regular lives, I've found that there are certain aspects of working from home that are actually way more valuable than I thought they were before, and the people in our organization are discovering that. So I think the same thing is happening in online. But the last thing I will say is that there were institutions that were heavily invested in online before. And so they might have had teaching and learning centers. They had staff that were helping faculty redo their courses to better take on, whether the flipped classroom or engaged learning or those types of things. And what's been really interesting about those institutions is that, while on the one hand, they're better prepared to handle the pandemic, the other thing that's happened is those teams, there might be, like at a large research university, 4 people that work on that team, because the faculty had not typically been imposing that much on those people to change their courses. When they went overnight, these teams are all absolutely overwhelmed. So this summer, they've been faced with huge amounts of trying to redo people's courses and support faculty. So, I think the bottom line is that there is a lot of change that has to happen in the processes and procedures to fully realize the benefits of online, that there's no way they could happen in the amount of time that was needed. They couldn't even happen over the summer to prepare for the fall. So you still have a situation where, for the most part, most of higher education is going to basically do Zoom classes online and not really have effective tools. But I do think that the realization of this and the experience with this is both going to change fundamentally the way people think about how to mix the use of online tools and in-person learning. Find the comparative advantage of each of those. Where is it that geography helps, where being local helps, as Mariet was pointing out, even just in the social awareness of being close to each other. And where does the technology enable the possibility of people being able to do things at scale? And fundamentally, at the end of the day, we all know that higher education is struggling with increasing costs. And by that, I don't mean necessarily the tuition. I mean, genuinely the cost of trying to deliver education in a face-to-face mode. And that goal to find more productivity and reduce costs of higher education, I think, is going to is going to have to happen if we're going to see more and more students at various economic levels be able to get educated.
Well, let's turn to that in a minute, and I want to get to that, like how sort of the pandemic is going to be pushing things in a different direction when we think about the future of higher education more generally. But Mariet, I was curious about just kind of, as Kevin said, this has been a really rapid process. I mean, you're sitting there as an administrator, you have had to adapt, your faculty have had to adapt. But you as a head of a kind of a branch campus and a global university probably have other challenges and then other opportunities too. Can you tell me a little bit about how, when you transition from that time in the spring towards the fall and what you're going to be doing now, how you're kind of drawing on those resources both within Abu Dhabi and globally to function coming this fall?
Yes, I think that I am maybe a tiny bit more optimistic than Kevin about what the fall is going to look like, at least for us. It will be different for different institutions. And I think a lot depends on when the institution made the decision that classes were going to be online in the fall. We made that decision really early. Because we lived with students on our campus, we knew that it was hard, but could be done. But that the worst thing we could do is start in person and then change again. So we said, okay, let's just in May make that decision. All courses in the fall will start and end online so that wherever people are, we have that international institution, they will be able to finish. But then we can layer on and bring in certain experiences that really need to be place-based, like working in a lab or having some carefully structured access to an art studio. We have wonderful arts programs, so that seems important. Perhaps make it possible again to have study hall in the library, which the library means so much to people and to an academic institution. So because we made that decision so early that everyone was going to go online in the fall, even as we allow a certain use of the campus, we, I think, could invest a lot of our energies and time through our teaching and learning center. And I think everybody who has a teaching and learning center who can do that, that university is also ahead a little bit. I think we have seen serious adjustments with faculty really being curious about your own teaching. It's been moving to see that, actually. Faculty who never had to do it, learning how to teach online and figure out how can we do a little bit more of this asynchronous, what has to be in the same time zone. And that's where we are also helped as NYU, and this is to Kevin's point about situations becoming revealed in sudden crises like this, where NYU turned out to be in a very lucky position. NYU, that large university I described across the world, has 15 study sites. 3 of them are degree granting campuses, NYU in New York, NYU Abu Dhabi, and NYU Shanghai. But we have 12 other sites in all these 6 continents. And so the sun absolutely never sets on NYU as a global institution. And we had been used to sending our students around campuses if they wanted to study abroad, and they do so very vigorously. Our professors too have taught in different sites and come from different sites to us. And so although in the spring, we were all a little disheartened at NYU as we had to close a lot of our sites and have students, leave those campuses because it was too dangerous to stay in Florence, for example. And that seemed a real deficit for our global model of a university. But now, when we flipped that around in the summer and said, where are all our 60,000 students going to be? What time zones will they be in? Can we stage courses in all these different time zones where our 15 different sites are? It turns out you can. And you can even offer a little bit of in-person access if the person is in country in a particular site. So it turns out that this global extension that allows us to be both in place, but also everywhere and somehow nowhere, allows us to experiment with very exciting courses. One example just to mention there, and then we'll move on, but we now have this wonderful series that has been generated by our provost office in New York of online courses by some of the truly greatest, most wonderful, most innovative faculty of NYU. Jan LeCun in artificial intelligence, Deb Willis on race and the arts, And we have some 12 courses like this that will be opened up to every single student of NYU, wherever they are, no cap, no limit on how many students can take it. Beginning to mobilize some of those advantages that Kevin was talking about, that we've been worried about. Do you want to have all your courses like that? Of course not. But having one or two courses with these really great professors that otherwise you'd never have access to if it had to be in your own campus is a real benefit. So I think we'll see a lot of that kind of innovation, I hope, coming out of, and therefore reaching more students, which is ultimately the goal, right? Teaching more people on the planet. It's needed. I hope that kind of innovation will indeed be a benefit of this forced online condition that universities have had to adjust to.
Yeah, Kevin, do you want to speak to that? Because obviously the issue of access is one that's really been highlighted by those who have been promoting more online education. That really this is going to be something that's necessary to lead to greater equity, because we know that that's a huge problem, especially when we look at education in the United States, but it's also more of a global problem. Do you want to speak briefly to that? And then I want to give time, of course, to get to, we already have some questions coming online here.
Sure. A lot of this ends up being sort of paradoxical in that you have one aspect that's a real pro and another aspect that's a real con. Mariet talked about the global education that NYU can offer, and as a single institution, making a course that's available and could get credit across all these different places. That's one of the big challenges facing higher education, is the transferability of credits. Mm-hmm. And this impacts very much those who don't have many resources. One of the biggest problems in the United States is students that don't complete their degree. They finish, a year or two and struggle with life, jobs, food, security, all kinds of things, and then they have some credits that are stranded and they can't take them to another university because they're not accepted, can't be articulated, et cetera. And I'm sure even at NYU there have been times when some department wouldn't take a course from one of the other regions or something, or that I shouldn't speak for NYU, but I know in many of the systems, University of California system or Cal State or others, they've only just recently made it possible to move around. So one of the big challenges for institutions that are not affiliated, if you do want to take introductory math, can you take that credit from one college or university to another and keep advancing to get your degree? And there often is, a lot of restriction to doing that. So that's an example of one of the challenges that face people who don't have resources. But the second thing is the obvious one. In one level, because you don't have to physically be on the campus, you can adjust your schedule, you can have another job, you can do things, you can take courses on your own, but then you have to have access to the internet, you have to have access to technology, you have to access to resources. And unfortunately, that is not evenly distributed either. And so you have people who could benefit from this tremendously by not having to have all the costs, both in time, space, geography, et cetera, to take courses, but they don't have the basic technology. They don't have the computer or the access to online. So, then you just get to this issue of public good, and is education a public good, and how do we make it so that people have basic internet access, how to educate themselves and get access to these resources? And that's one of the challenges of trying to overcome these equity issues.
Right. I'm sure that's one that we're going to be discussing a lot in the United States moving forward. But let's turn, I'll welcome you all now to go ahead and submit your questions. We're using the Q&A function, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. Because we have a large number of participants, that's the way we'll be doing that. But we invite you all to please join the conversation through your questions. I'm going to look in right now and draw upon some. We have a series of questions from Priyanka that have to do a lot with the role of these branch campuses, particularly in the Emirates, Mariet. So I think this is for you. One, there's a question about really the local students, your balance of local students versus international students. One, kind of how do you attract and what attracts local students, Emiratis in particular, to these campuses over the other more federal universities? And also a question about whether you're going to continue to recruit foreign students, or do you think there'll be a turn towards trying to get more Emirati locals on your campus? And finally, in line with that as well, there's a question about the role you play in boosting the employability of Emiratis, or playing a role in improving their education with an eye towards employment.
Well, that's a great basket of questions. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, MWU Abu Dhabi is resolutely a university in and of Abu Dhabi and in and of the world. And we were brought to be that, and we take that mission extremely seriously. We are in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE and the region for a purpose, because we really wanted to be here. NYU wanted to be here. And so the Emirati students we have play an enormously important role on our campus. They are fantastic students, as all our students are. We are an exceedingly selective institution, as I think most of you know. And I'm happy to say that 20% of our students are Emirati nationals. And it's a very interesting question you ask, what would attract them? And I think that's an interesting thing. If you look at the matrix of higher education is really a matrix, right? Not all universities are the same. And before Abu Dhabi came here, there were already extremely good local universities and national universities. UAE University is almost as old as the country itself, going back to 1976. We have Zayed University, Khalifa University of Science and Technology, the higher colleges of technology, all really important institutions we work with. What I think attracts Emirati students to our particular environment is precisely its international character, and the fact that you can obtain a verifiable, great New York University degree without having to study entirely in New York or abroad. Many Emirati nationals love the country. They love being here. They want to stay here, the way many students prefer to study in their own country. But they want to have access to rich opportunities abroad, and that's in those 14 other sites of NYU that I mentioned, and through research opportunities. And so we find that university students who have had an interest in going to an international or an American university would realize they can get that kind of quality and creative and innovative teaching and research opportunities with us right here in Abu Dhabi, and then travel 1-2 semesters to our other sites. They find this extremely appealing. In terms of employability, we're very proud of MWU Abu Dhabi. We basically place 98% of our graduates within 6 months of graduating, and often sooner, in very meaningful positions of employment. 40% stay in the UAE from around the world, right? In the UAE, and 60% go abroad. And they go either find employment, or they go to really great graduate programs or fellowship opportunities. In the 7 graduating classes we've only graduated 7 classes, right? We've had 14 Rhodes Scholars. The vast majority of them have been Emirati students. It is amazing. They have gone on to do amazing things and have jobs afterwards, of course, as you can imagine, after they studied for their masters at Oxford on the Rhodes Scholarship. It's just an example. And they come back and they occupy incredibly important positions, often startup positions, but important pathways into government functions, consulting, banking, cultural institutions, the kind of the flourishing and building of the society here. And one of the graduates of our very first class, one of these Rhodes Scholars, Shama Al-Mazroui, is today the Minister of State for Youth of the UAE. So I think, I think there is a real upside to what Emirati students bring to us, and what I hope we give to them as they set out on their journeys. But we'll continue to recruit internationally as well. We were founded to be a university like that.
We have a question from Dale Eichelman. He's asking about other models of higher education across the Gulf. And of course, this is a model that we've seen, this idea of branch campuses or international campuses. We have other examples of that. Of course, Qatar was an early innovator of that. So we have a lot of these same kind of branch campuses in Qatar. We could talk about other campuses as well. In the UAE, the Sorbonne, right, as another campus. There was a question if you could say something about these different models of higher education in the Gulf, and also whether you have a cooperation with a lot of these other kinds of campuses across the Gulf.
It's amazing to see the flourishing of higher education and creation of new institutions in the Gulf, on the Arab Peninsula, over the last 20 years. It's been utterly inspiring, and we are a part of that, of course. Education City in Qatar delivers specific degree programs, not a full-scale university. Like, we are in everything, right? Science, technology, engineering, social science, humanities, and arts, and now building out graduate programs on top of the undergraduate as well. So we're kind of a full-scale university, and that's a little different from that model where there were universities from the United States, different ones, each offering their own in Qatar, you know, journalism by Northwestern, engineering by Texas A&M, and so forth. So our model is different in that regard, in that we are really a full-scale university. And in that sense, there are other models to look at in Saudi, for example. An extremely impressive institution that was created and opened a little bit ahead of us in 2009, went to the opening, is KAUST, the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, which you can think of as sort of a Caltech type institution for the Arab world. And we are incredibly impressed by the scientists they have attracted and are producing for the region. And then there are, but that of course is a university that is not an American university. So we offer an NYU degree. So it's a different model. It's a locally created university of a very strong international character. The American University of Sharjah is somewhat like that as well, you could say. It had a starting relationship with the American University in Washington, but is essentially kind of an independent private university in Sharjah. So we see a lot of exciting models, and I think that's good. We love collaborating with each of these institutions to the extent that our faculty have connections among them. Collaborations among universities only really work well if the professors, the scholars, the scientists, the artists want to be together and see shared interests. And for example, we have strong arts collaborations, for example, with the American University of Sharjah. But in principle, a university like ours, in and of Abu Dhabi, in and of the world, is very open to that kind of work. We are all in it together as institutions of higher education, opening up opportunity and building the knowledge economies that this region needs.
I think I have a question, and this would probably be more for Kevin, interesting from Sahana Mitra. She says there's a lot of confusion with the new semester starting, whether classes are going to be online or not. And in Bahrain, she says the Higher Education Council has left this option with the students for online or face-to-face teaching. And she's wondering how faculty can make face-to-face teaching, I think she herself is in a university, more meaningful online if the students are staying home. So I don't know, Kevin, do you have some advice for how the new procedures are making things more interesting?
That is a great question. And, you know, Mariet mentioned the fact that deciding early to go online so that people could prepare was a really important decision that NYU Abu Dhabi made, but many institutions have not made that kind of commitment. You know, we just heard in the United States, University of North Carolina, the students came back for a week and then they told them to go all online. So, you know, it is generally very random almost. It's so challenging in today's environment. What I would say from what we've learned over time, in the little bit of advice I would give is that you want to try to focus where you're putting your energies into the places where you can add the most value. So what I would try to do if I were in your case, I'd probably try to record my lectures in some simple fashion, prepare them as recorded lectures, do that and have everyone use the recorded lectures, and whether they're coming from home or they're coming in, and then try to facilitate conversations around the content. You know, in other words, the sort of flipped classroom kind of model where people can watch the videos on their own time, and then create time where there can be engagement. And that engagement can be face-to-face for some of the students, and then you can try to bring the other students into some work group type sessions to do the other aspects. The silver lining of the pandemic is there's been huge investments, obviously, in the biomedical areas to develop vaccines, et cetera, and huge amounts of research being done. And I think there's also some real significant research and response to online learning it's been where some new technologies are moving forward. I think one of the key technologies that we really need is a more engaged kind of environment, not an environment like this, a webinar, but a real engaged environment where students can interact in tables or small groups and be facilitated by a faculty member or by a TA, where you get that feeling of engagement and guidance at the same time. And you're going to see there's a company called Engagely that's just starting out. There are going to be some great new tools, I think, that come out of the other side of this that will be helpful. But I think when you're trying to do something like you're explaining, it's changing by the minute. You're having to hustle, and you only have the tools that you have. I would emphasize, putting the lectures online that everyone can see them, and then trying to figure out ways if you can use something like Zoom to do small group sessions. And again, what you run into is how much flexibility can you have in terms of meeting class time and all that get into processes and procedures. So I wish you luck at trying to identify the best way to put it together.
So I have, there's a couple of questions for you, Mariet, that have to do with basically trying to function as you do as a global university in these very different kind of social and political settings. One from Bill McKay about how your institutions have been able to satisfy external professional bodies to assure kind of continued integrity of courses for preparing students for professional accreditation, such as law. So that kind of question of credentialing that Kevin spoke about before. I also had a question, sorry, trying to go back and find it. Sorry if I don't have it exactly right or the name because I'm trying to find it, but it was something about the whole question, as Kevin mentioned, about dissent and how you kind of manage the question, how people are able to express dissent when you're working in these different political and social environments.
Yeah. Great questions both. Thank you for the questions. So on accreditation and making sure that our programs, when they're online or in a more hybrid mode, as they mostly will be now, how you satisfy accreditation. Now, we don't have a law school. Maybe we will one day, but we certainly have accreditors, and we have two accreditors. We have, of course, accreditation through NYU, our parent and sibling institution that comes from Middle States, the big accreditation commission. And they looked very hard at us, of course. They look hard at us as a part of NYU. So in that sense, when NYU can offer courses online, so can we. But we take it very seriously, apart from the accrediting, although we tell our accreditors this too. We start from the learning outcomes that are written into all of our programs and written into all of our courses on the level of the syllabus. And when we ran dozens and dozens and dozens of workshops in the middle of March to get all our faculty ready to take 388 courses online, and we didn't drop a single one, we said, how do you do this? Go back to your learning outcomes. What were you trying to teach here? What do you want students to take away? And then find out the equivalent to that. And so our other accreditor here in the UAE is the Ministry of Education's Commission on Academic Accreditation, a very serious body that really works on these matters and constantly tries to improve its own processes, which is impressive. And literally the Minister of Education himself invited with the people who work most closely with him, including the head of the Accreditation Commission, invited people like me for private conversations, very structured, to talk about our experience of online learning. They surveyed students, they surveyed faculty. They asked how we were coping with this and how we were adjusting. They asked us, what do you need? Instead of just saying, this is what you shall do. It's been very impressive. So that way we also learned from what others were doing. And so that the ministry can be reassured that we really are serious about delivering that educational value. Now, turning then to the other question about when you're dealing with something as threatening as a global pandemic. And actually the lives of people can be on the line. And you have to be very mindful that most professors, after all, are older than students, and many of them are in a sort of older age cohort. Some may have underlying conditions. So you have to be really careful and responsible about what you ask your faculty and staff to do, what you ask students to do, and how you manage that risk. And so you have to be very clear about your values and have robust and open discussion of that. And we did through the spring. I think I've never had so many faculty meetings, student government meetings, staff meetings, and also new kinds of meetings that were really good, where we brought those constituencies together. Some of our Zoom halls had 1,000 people on them, talking about these things, a webinar style. We'd get all these questions, we solicit them in advance, and that allowed for very robust discussion, and not everyone agrees. We are an academic institution. We have freedom of inquiry on our campus, and so we work out these issues amongst ourselves the way you would in any proper university where the voices of people matter. And so that's been actually a very invigorating part. It hasn't always been easy, but it's been an invigorating part of us as a community, I would say.
I have a question here from Ted Katouf, who works with Ahmed East. He says that they've been identifying some of the most talented students from undeserved backgrounds in occupied Palestine and Lebanon, and preparing them basically for scholarships from US colleges and universities. He says that NYU Abu Dhabi has on occasion extended generous scholarships. And he was wondering if we could be entering into a period for more formal referral with NYU Abu Dhabi. And I think given the timing of our seminar, it might be interesting just to ask you too, with the announcement about the recent normalization plans for the Emirates, UAE, to normalize relations with Israel, if you see some changes taking place then, or some opportunities. Do you think that's something that's going to actually work its way into the educational field? But please also address Ted's specific question.
Well, Ted, first of all, thank you for the question. We love Ahmed East. You have an incredibly important organization, and we share, of course, a mission in opening up the greatest education we can provide to students of talent wherever they are, or whatever their very difficult circumstances often may have been. That's very true for NYU Abu Dhabi. It's very true for the work that you do. And we can talk about those referrals. Let's take that offline, but I just want to express my incredible admiration for the organization. I've known several of its leaders over the years. Yes, Kristin, so important, this recent announcement of this opening of diplomatic relations between the UAE and Israel. No matter where you sit on the spectrum of political opinion, clearly this is a major event for the region. Clearly also, it is still a work in progress, although I do hear that phone lines were opened up last week. Some people have been reporting that, which is itself a major moment. I'm not a politician, nor am I a diplomat. I am an educator and a leader of an educational institution and a research institution. And I can say that this really does seem to be an incredibly important opening for universities and those who live in them, researchers, faculty, staff, and students in the UAE and in Israel, and more broadly in the region, I think should stand to benefit from this opening once all is said and done. And there's a lot to be worked out. I do not underestimate at all. I've worked in this region a long time. I don't underestimate at all the depth and reach of the historical conflict and how difficult that is, and how different people will feel about that, depending on the position from which you come. But I think that we can agree that we need a more peaceful Middle East, North Africa, West Asia. It is really important for that to happen. And if this is a step, and you cannot do that by just flipping a switch, the conflict is very old, but sometimes some switches need to be flipped if we're going to make progress. And so I really see a lot of potential given the growth of knowledge institutions that we've just been talking about in the region, in the UAE, the investment that these governments in the Gulf have made in education and research and knowledge, and also in tolerance. The UAE has been working for a long time, as you know, to promote religious tolerance, the public practice of the allowance of public worship has seen enormous strides in the last 20 years. Synagogues, a synagogue has been opened, a synagogue is being built together with other houses of worship, Hindu, Christian, Baha'i, and so forth. So there has been all this opening has already happened. If we can extend that kind of opening to learning, to joint research projects, collaborations among universities, professors, and also maybe have students in the same space from these very different positions they come from, learning together. An institution like MWI Abu Dhabi is sort of based on that vision of international consilience and bringing people together across often very radical kinds of difference. That's how we recruit students. We recruit them for that appetite of doing that hard work of living together and creating knowledge together across difference. And so from those perspectives, on a high level, you'd have to say, this seems a very important moment of opening.
Well, thank you. It seems like you certainly are going to have a lot on your plate with the semester moving forward, and a lot more for you to think about, Kevin. As we saw, there's a lot of interest now in how people can improve their skills, and teachers trying to figure out how they can do that in a more online environment. We had several questions too, just kind of talking about how the pandemic is shifting and affecting higher education across the Gulf. I saw some educators, sorry I didn't get to your question, Fahad Sumait, about just the difficulties and trauma of spending so much time sitting in front of a screen right now, and how we can deal with that. So I think these are probably a lot of questions that are going to emerge and develop as everybody wrestles with this kind of unprecedented new year in the Gulf and education. So maybe we can come back and revisit those when we have more experience under our belt. But I guess we're out of time, so I want to thank both of you for sharing your insights and the experience of NYU Abu Dhabi, and also to all of you for joining us. And hopefully we can get into more of these questions and more of these experiences in another meeting. Thank you.